Welcome to the Pharma Files, where medicine meets mystery. Hi, I'm Lance Samard.
Hi, I'm Justine Burke.
So to start off our exploration today, I want you to imagine a scene.
Okay, set the stage for us.
It's a chilly March evening, back in 1951, and you're sitting in this packed, smoky Chicago hotel ballroom.
Oh man, the 50s. Just cigarette smoke everywhere.
Oh, absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And the guy standing at the podium in front of you, he isn't, some snake oil salesman or a fringe internet personality.
Right.
He is one of the most respected medical scientists in America. I mean, a man who was a vice president of the University of Illinois.
That is a massive position of authority.
Exactly. And even more than that, he is a man who literally helped write the ethical rules for human experimentation at the Nuremberg trials following the Second World War.
Wow. I mean, you literally cannot buy that kind of credibility.
You really can't. And this titan of medicine is standing in front of hundreds of people, looking them dead in the eye and announcing that he has found a treatment that shrinks cancer tumors.
A miracle cure.
A miracle cure.
The electricity in that room must have been palpable. I mean, you have an audience filled with doctors, reporters, local officials, all just hanging on every single word.
Yeah, you could probably hear a pin drop.
Oh, for sure, because the desperation for a cure in 1951 was so profound. And hearing this from someone in the medical establishment, it would have turned that desperation into just absolute euphoria.
And, look, you'd believe him, wouldn't you? Just based on his resume alone.
Without a second thought.
But here is the staggering premise of our story today. That cure he was announcing, it turned out to be nothing more than mineral oil and a really common gym supplement.
It's just so crazy to think about.
It is. So today we are exploring the bizarre, completely true story of Krebiozen. It's this non-existent cancer drug that somehow sparked a massive national movement.
Triggered a 9-month federal trial, too.
Right, and ended up being debated on the floor of the United States Senate. We're going to look at how brilliant minds get fooled and explore the astonishing, very real power of human expectation.
Because, in a world where we are constantly bombarded by breakthrough health trends and miracle wellness protocols, this story is actually a vital lesson for you.
Definitely.
It illustrates how easily authority, prestige, and human desperation can completely override hard, objective data.
Yeah, we really have to start with that announcement in Chicago. The scientist at the podium is Dr. Andrew Ivy.
Right, Dr. Ivy.
And we really need to emphasize his credibility here. Like we said, he wasn't just a lab tech. He was the American Medical Association's expert at the Nuremberg medical trials.
He helped articulate the Nuremberg Code, which, set the ethical principles governing human experimentation for the rest of the 20th century.
Exactly. So when a man like that says, "I watched a drug shrink tumors," you don't question it. You take notes.
And his delivery that night was incredibly careful, very measured. He didn't sound like some fanatic, right? He sounded like a rigorous scientist just reporting the facts.
Just giving the data.
Yeah. He told the audience that this drug, Krebiozen, had produced results in cancer patients that conventional medicine simply could not match.
And the media ate it up. Reporters filed their stories that very night, and within weeks, letters from desperate patients were just flooding in, begging for access to this miracle.
But the reality of that moment, it is completely absurd when you look behind the curtain.
It really is, because at the exact moment he was making this world-changing announcement, the entire national supply of Krebiozen was just a little white powder dissolved in mineral oil.
And nobody, not the public, not the other doctors, not even Andrew Ivy himself, knew exactly what was in that powder.
Which I am genuinely struggling to comprehend. I mean, if we put this in modern terms, this is like the Surgeon General interrupting the evening news to endorse a secret unnamed potion cooked up in a random garage.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
Like, how does a scientist whose historical legacy is literally built on medical ethics endorse something when he doesn't even know the ingredients?
It points to a massive, just glaring psychological blind spot that even the most rigorous scientists can suffer from. You see, Ivy wasn't just buying a chemical compound.
He was buying a story.
Exactly. He was buying a narrative. And to understand how a mind like his was captivated, we have to look at who brought this mystery powder to Chicago in the first place.
Enter the man with the briefcase, Stevan Durovich.
Yes. So Durovich was a Yugoslav physician who arrived in Chicago in 1949 by way of Argentina.
Quite the journey.
Right. And like a lot of improbable things that found their way to America after World War II, he arrived with a highly cinematic backstory.
Oh, it's straight out of a movie.
He claimed he had developed this cancer treatment through a very specific exotic process involving horses.
Wait, horses?
Yeah, so he claimed he was injecting horses with a bacterium called Actinomyces bovis.
Which, if I remember correctly, is the bacteria responsible for a really severe cattle disease known as lumpy jaw. Right. Yes, lumpy jaw. And Durovich's underlying theory was undeniably elegant. He argued that inducing this severe bacterial infection would provoke the horse's immune system into producing a unique protective substance to fight it off.
Okay, I'm following.
So his claim was that he could draw the horse's blood, extract this newly synthesized protective factor from the blood serum, and then administer it to human cancer patients. He called it Krebiozen, translating roughly to regulator of growth.
So he's basically treating the horse's immune system like a biological factory. You provoke the factory with a disease, let it manufacture the weapons, and then you just harvest those weapons for humans.
That is the exact logic he presented.
It sounds incredibly modern.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 1950s, the standard treatments for cancer were brutal. Radical surgery was the norm.
Very invasive.
You had radiation, and you had the very first highly toxic rounds of chemotherapy, which actually derived from World War II mustard gas research.
Wow.
Yeah. The approach was essentially poisoning the body and just hoping the cancer died before the patient did. The medical landscape for oncology was incredibly bleak back then. The side effects were devastating and survival rates were poor.
So into that darkness walks Durovich, pitching a gentle biological agent. He's telling patients, we aren't going to poison the disease. We are going to work with your own defenses. We are just going to nudge the body to heal itself.
It's a very compelling pitch.
It taps into this innate, very human desire for a harmonious healing process. It actually sounds identical to the wellness influencer rhetoric you hear today, right?
Oh, 100%.
The whole boosting the immune system naturally instead of relying on toxic pharmaceuticals.
And that pitch completely bypasses our critical faculties. Because the theory sounded beautiful. The horses were real animals you could see. The blood serum was tangible.
But a beautiful story is in science.
Exactly. The critical leap, whether that horse serum had anything whatsoever to do with curing human cancer, was a question that would take 15 years and a federal courtroom to finally settle.
Because there was one massive recurring obstacle to finding the truth, right? Durovich's absolute wall of secrecy.
He treated this formula like it was the nuclear launch codes.
Seriously. He guarded the extraction process relentlessly. The quantities of Krebiozen he provided were always tiny. The extraction method he described in his papers was impossibly vague.
Very convenient.
Yeah, the supply was always mysteriously limited.
And this secrecy created a deep, polarizing divide in how he was perceived. It perfectly mirrored the cultural anxieties of the time, too.
Oh, so?
Well, if you were a desperate patient, you looked at that secrecy and thought it made perfect sense. In the post-war era, the concept of a lone genius was highly romanticized.
Oh, sure, like Einstein or Tesla.
Exactly. Supporters believed Durovich was protecting a massive medical breakthrough from the greedy, emerging pharmaceutical conglomerates.
But if you were a rigorous scientist, you look at that same secrecy and saw blatant evasion. Like, you can't replicate a study if the guy won't tell you how he made the drug.
Right.
So how did Durovich manage to hide his formula for a decade and a half?
He essentially weaponized the desperation of the patients. Whenever the medical establishment pushed too hard for the chemical formula, Durovich and his supporters would accuse them of trying to steal the drug or suppress a cure.
Wow.
Initially, the American Medical Association tried to evaluate it purely based on clinical outcomes. They reviewed about 100 patient records provided by Krebiozen's promoters.
And what did they find?
Zero evidence that the drug did anything at all. No tumor shrinkage, no extended survival rates, nothing.
And the government's own reviewers followed up, right?
Yeah.
They went through hundreds more records and came to the exact same conclusion.
Yep. The National Cancer Institute refused to run a full clinical trial. They stated that the preliminary data just didn't justify the resources, especially for a substance the creator refused to identify.
So when did the house of cards finally fall?
The turning point didn't arrive until the early 1960s. The Food and Drug Administration had recently been granted broader powers to require proof of a drug's efficacy and safety. Under intense pressure, Durovich was finally forced to submit actual physical samples of the Krebiozen powder to the FDA for chemical analysis.
Wait, you're telling me that after a decade of congressional debates, massive national hype, countless newspaper headlines, the FDA finally gets to open the vial and they find creatine, the muscle powder.
They utilized infrared spectroscopy, which was highly advanced at the time. It basically involves shining infrared light through a substance to capture its unique chemical fingerprint.
Right.
And when they compared the Krebiozen powder's fingerprint to known chemical compounds, it was a perfect, undeniable match for creatine.
The exact same compound found in ordinary muscle tissue, and the stuff you can buy today in giant plastic tubs at literally any supplement store in the country to help you lift heavier weights.
That's the stuff. And the injectable liquid itself was just mineral oil. Sometimes it had a tiny trace of the creatine dissolved in it, but it was essentially inert mineral oil.
Unbelievable.
There was no exotic serum factor. There was no regulator of growth derived from lumpy jaw infections. Whatever those horses had manufactured in their immune systems, absolutely none of it was reaching those little glass vials.
I am floored.
Yeah.
We have a national patient movement. We have the former vice president of a major university staking his legacy on this, and it is literally gym powder and mineral oil.
It really is.
Durovich must have just been scraping cheap, ordinary ingredients together to create an illusion. But logically, the story should end the second the FDA publishes that infrared spectroscopy report, right?
Yeah.
Everyone packs up, Durovich goes to jail, Ivy apologizes, end of story.
You would think so. But by the early 1960s, Krebiozen wasn't just a drug anymore. It had evolved into a genuine political constituency.
A political constituency for a fake drug.
Yeah. Patients and their families had formed action committees. Petitions were circulating nationwide. The chemistry didn't matter to them anymore.
Because they felt they were fighting for their lives against this cold, bureaucratic medical establishment that wanted to suppress a cure.
Exactly. And they found a massively powerful ally in Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois.
Now, Senator Douglas is a fascinating character in this whole saga. He wasn't some fringe conspiracy theorist.
No, not at all.
He was an economist by training. He had a hard-earned, sterling reputation for political integrity in Washington. But, and this is the big game, but he also considered Andrew Ivy a close personal friend.
And that friendship blinded him. Douglas looked at the situation through the lens of loyalty and anti-establishment fairness. He didn't see a quack cure being rightfully debunked by the FDA.
He saw his distinguished, honorable friend being stonewalled by institutional bullies.
Precisely. So Douglas began aggressively pressing federal agencies to test Krebiozen properly, framing the entire conflict as a matter of due process.
And that is how a totally debunked mixture of mineral oil and creatine ended up being debated on the floor of the U.S. Senate.
Yep.
The momentum was carried entirely by the credibility of the men attached to it,
Right.
rather than a single shred of scientific merit.
But this political pressure ultimately forced the government's hand. In 1964, a federal grand jury indicted Durovich, Andrew Ivy, and 2 of their associates on dozens of counts, including outright fraud, conspiracy, and mislabeling.
And this was not a quick open and shut case, was it?
Far from it. The trial ran for 9 brutal months. It was one of the longest trials in American history at the time.
I'm struggling to understand how this trial takes 9 months. The government has definitive infrared spectroscopy proving the drug is gym powder and oil. How do you defend against that?
Well, the courtroom became this epic clash between cold, hard chemistry and raw, emotional human testimony. On one side, the prosecution methodically laid out the FDA reports.
The science.
Right. On the other side, the defense paraded a line of patients who swore on the stand that Krebiozen had saved their lives. But the real centerpiece of the defense was Andrew Ivy himself.
The titan of medical ethics takes the stand.
He sat there day after day defending his belief in the drug. He wasn't relying on the chemistry. He was relying on his observations of the patients.
And the verdict. The jury acquitted everyone. Not guilty across the board. How on earth does a jury ignore the science when it is that black and white?
Because the verdict was never actually a scientific vindication of Krebiozen. After the trial, the jury foreman gave an interview explaining their logic.
What did he say?
The jury had been completely overwhelmed by months of dense scientific jargon, but what they could easily understand was human character. The foreman said they simply couldn't look at Andrew Ivy with his grandfatherly demeanor and absolute unwavering conviction and see a swindler.
So they didn't want to ruin him.
Right. The jury decided the drug might have some merit, and they weren't willing to legally destroy it, and Ivy's reputation without what they felt was a fair test.
Wow. So in the court of public opinion, the credibility of the messenger matters so much more than the actual fact.
Sadly, yes.
The jury looked at the FDA's flawless chemical breakdown, and then they looked at Andrew Ivy's undeniable sincerity, and they chose sincerity.
Ivy's belief was his best defense. He didn't look like a fraud because he genuinely believed he was helping people. He had fooled himself just as deeply as he had fooled the public.
Which worked out terribly for the pursuit of scientific truth, but great for keeping them out of federal prison.
Although Durovich still fled the country shortly after the trial to avoid massive tax evasion charges.
Oh, of course he did.
But Ivy went back to Illinois and publicly defended Krebiozen for the rest of his life. He died in 1978, still utterly convinced he had been right the whole time.
It's a tragic arc for someone who drafted the Nuremberg Code. But you brought up a lingering mystery earlier. If the drug was chemically worthless, just oil and creatine, why did the patients fight so incredibly hard for it?
That's a great question.
Why did they testify under oath that it saved them? To understand that, we have to look at a piece of evidence that was never shown in that courtroom. It reveals the true, hidden mechanism behind this entire saga.
You're talking about the case of Mr. Wright.
I am. This is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating and honestly heartbreaking medical case studies I have ever encountered. It is the ultimate manifestation of the placebo effect.
It really is. So in the 1950s, a psychologist named Bruno Klopfer was documenting the case of a patient he simply referred to as Mr. Wright.
And what was his condition?
Wright had advanced terminal lymphoma. Tumors the size of oranges were spread throughout his neck, chest, and abdomen.
Jesus.
He had exhausted all conventional medical options and was bedridden, essentially waiting to die. But he had heard the media hype about this new miracle drug, Krebiozen, and he begged his doctor for it.
And his physician eventually relents, right? He administers a Krebiozen injection on a Friday. And what happens over the weekend is this cycle of belief that completely defies logic.
Yeah. Step 1, Mr. Wright gets the drug. By Monday, his tumors have reportedly shrunk dramatically. They literally melt away to half their size.
By half their size, in a weekend.
He gets out of bed, walks around the ward, and is discharged from the hospital shortly after. He resumes his normal life, even flying his own plane again.
It is a miraculous recovery.
Yeah.
But then we reach step 2. A few months later, Mr. Wright is reading the newspaper, and he sees the early reports from the American Medical Association stating that Krebiozen is likely a fraud and has no clinical value.
And almost immediately, Mr. Wright relapses. His belief is punctured, and his body follows suit. The tumors return, his health crashes, and he is rushed back to the hospital near death once again.
This is where his doctor makes a highly unethical but deeply revealing decision. The doctor realizes that Wright's belief might be the active ingredient driving his recovery.
Right, so we enter step 3.
The doctor tells Mr. Wright, don't listen to the newspapers. The early batches deteriorated in transit. We just received a fresh, super potent, highly refined batch of Krebiozen.
But the doctor doesn't give him Krebiozen. He injects Mr. Wright with plain, sterile water.
And Mr. Wright recovers a second time. The tumors shrink again. The fluid in his chest clears up. He gets out of bed and goes home, completely asymptomatic, running entirely on the belief that he had been given a miracle cure.
It's astounding.
I have to pause here because we throw the term placebo effect around a lot, but how does expectation literally alter cellular reality like that? How does water shrink a tumor?
It comes down to the nascent field of psychoneuroimmunology.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But basically, the placebo effect isn't just positive thinking. It is a tangible biochemical cascade. When Mr. Wright believed he was receiving a cure, his brain likely triggered a massive reduction in stress hormones like cortisol, which normally suppress the immune system.
Okay, that makes sense.
Simultaneously, his brain would release endorphins and modulate his autonomic nervous system. By removing the immunosuppressive weight of terminal despair, his body's own natural killer cells and immune responses may have temporarily surged, aggressively attacking the lymphoma.
Wow.
The belief acted as a biological key, unlocking an extreme immune response.
So the mind is sending physical, chemical signals to the immune system based purely on a narrative. The Krebiozen didn't shrink the tumors. The water certainly didn't shrink the tumors. Mr. Wright's expectation mobilized his own biology.
It is a profound demonstration of the mind-body connection, but it also dictates the tragic final step of Mr. Wright's journey.
The reality check.
Yeah. He stays well for another couple of months, but eventually the FDA releases its definitive, unavoidable public announcement. Krebiozen is completely worthless. It's just mineral oil.
Yeah, he sees it.
Mr. Wright reads this definitive debunking. His belief is finally completely shattered. The biological key is thrown away. He returns to the hospital, relapses for the third time, and dies within days.
The narrative gave him life, and the loss of the narrative killed him.
That is the uncomfortable, beating heart of this entire story. The substance in the vial was mineral oil and creatine. It had absolutely zero pharmacological effect on cancer cells in a petri dish.
But the effect on Mr. Wright was profoundly, measurably real. and it lasted exactly as long as his belief in Andrew Ivy and Stephen Durovich did.
Exactly.
As we distill what we've actually learned from this incredible piece of medical history, there are three massive takeaways here.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, a brilliant, honorable scientist like Andrew Ivy, a man who quite literally wrote the book on medical ethics and human experimentation, can be utterly, devastatingly wrong, blinded by his own desperate desire to find a cure.
Second, a completely worthless concoction of gym supplements and mineral oil can produce visible physical results in a dying patient, functioning entirely through the complex biochemical mechanism of hope.
And finally, that hope, when it is attached to a trusted name and wrapped in a compelling story, is powerful enough to blind a jury of our peers, co-opt a U.S. senator, and trigger a 9-month federal trial before anyone manages to prove there was never anything in the vial to begin with.
It leaves you with a lot to consider regarding your own daily life. When you are looking at the latest health trends or wellness protocols, how are your own hopes, your own fears, and the authority figures that you implicitly trust coloring your perception of reality?
Are you critically evaluating the chemistry, or are you just buying the story?
That's a question we all need to ask ourselves, especially in an era of endless medical information and influencer endorsements.
For sure.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire time talking about how Krebiozen was a fake drug, a massive fraud perpetrated on the public.
Right.
But if a completely fake drug, a simple placebo of water or mineral oil, can be powerful enough to physically shrink advanced lymphoma tumors and get a dying man out of a hospital bed just through the sheer biochemical cascade of human belief.
Yeah.
Should modern medical science be spending less time trying to eliminate the placebo effect in clinical trials and more time figuring out how to ethically harness it?
Imagine that.
Yeah.
The cure was never in the needle. It was the expectation all along.
Yeah.
Until next time.